Good morning. We look today at Leviticus chapters 6 and 7. And chapter 6 starts out again with, when any of you sin and commit a trespass against the Lord by deceiving a neighbor. So if we sin against our neighbor, we are also sinning against the Lord. I mean, it's just one of those things we may not think about that. But, you know, if we do something wrong to our neighbor, to our friend, to our enemy, we are still sinning against God. You know, that's, kind of love your neighbor as yourself, and honor your father and mother, and do not steal, do not steal, do not kill. All of those things that pertain, the second part of the Ten Commandments deals with how we treat each other. And if we sin against our fellow human being, we are sinning against God as well. And so the first part of chapter 6, the first 7 verses basically deal with the sinning against a neighbor, defrauding them, taking advantage of them, and the restitution, the sacrifice that would be made, and you bring your guilt offering to the Lord. And, we go to a court of law, we have a hearing to determine guilt, and often, the guilty party, if you have stolen something, you need to make restitution. If you have broken something, you make restitution. And so and hopefully we feel this guilt, or, if someone does something wrong, they feel guilt, and they should. I mean, we shouldn't be able to do something against someone else that hurts someone else and not feel some remorse within us. I mean, this is a part of just human nature for the most part, to me anyway. But anyway, they talk about guilt offerings. And then chapter 6, verse 8 through the end of chapter 7 basically deal with instructions to the priests concerning sacrifices. And so a lot of these things that we read, in these verses are maybe restating what's already been said in previous chapters of Exodus concerning the sacrifices, expanding them a little bit, showing a little bit more of how some of the animal offerings or some of the meat is then for the priests to eat. Some of the grain offerings or the bread offerings are for the priests to eat. And these offerings that the priests eat are for the male priests only. And they are to be eaten in the tabernacle, in the holy place, so that they remain holy. And by doing so, the priest remains holy, so then the priest can pass this holiness on to those who have come with the sacrifices. And, it's, as I read through this, yesterday and then again earlier this morning, there's so much similarity and so much of it that this is one of the places I kind of get bogged down in Leviticus with the readings of the similar things, and especially when it's reiterating what we've already read in the previous chapters. But they are, it's called maybe supplemental laws or expansions of the laws and of the what the priests are to do and that. And when it talks about, if a sacrifice has been made in an earthen vessel, a clay pot or something, well, that pot has to be destroyed because the clay pot, the earthen vessel, is porous, and some of the sacrifice, so some of the burnt offering may have, gotten into that, and then so that pot needs to be broken and not used again because it's not pure and unclean. And whereas with the bronze pots, which were used most often because of their durability, they could be scrubbed and washed and scoured, and there would be nothing remaining of the sacrifice that was within them, so that then they would be acceptable for subsequent sacrifices. And it's some of the ritual is to me a little bit over the top. But then and sometimes maybe I'm a little bit too relaxed about some of the ritual, and there are certain practices and certain things that, within our order of worship, within as we come to God. And I know sometimes when I pray, I get sidetracked. I shouldn't say sometimes when I pray. I get sidetracked often, especially if I'm praying by myself, I'm trying to talk to God, and then all of a sudden my mind goes, weep, off here and there. But, so the ritual, the staying focused on what God has said is important. And with the priests, being in the tabernacle, in the Holy of Holies, eating the holy foods, the meat and the breads that have been offered for sacrifices become holy to God. It says that. And then therefore by eating these holy foods, the priests are holy. And that's why there was talking about if a priest had sinned and was thereby unclean, not holy to come before God, that priest needed to make certain sacrifices and to get back to that state of holiness. And the rituals and the cleansing, it all ties into so much of Jewish tradition, and that tradition is carried out, in the time of Jesus with he goes his first miracle, the turning of water into wine at the wedding of Cana. Those 6 jars that were empty were there for the ritual cleansing that was required by Jewish law. And granted, some of those laws may have been expanded by the people, but God put a lot of very specific things, specific details in some of those laws for how they were to be washed and how they were to be prepared, and all of those different things that way. And so there were, a lot of rituals, a lot of, like none of the fat should be eaten from this animal, but yet the meat would be okay. And it just, the priests had a fine line of things that they had to follow and do, and in the way that they set themselves apart. And the priests weren't out in the fields tending the flocks or the herds, or they weren't gathering the harvest, they weren't sowing and weeding and doing that. The priest's duty was in the temple to be the go-between between the rest of the people and God. And the priests were very set apart for that. And we see that so much in today's society. With pastors, working full-time in the church, and with priests, this is their duty, and they have each and every day, you do these certain things, and it's, but yet today has changed a lot too in the expectations of pastors and priests to some extent, but yet pastors and priests are still looked at as the person that most people come to approach God in a different manner, or to hear God's word, or to hear an explanation of God's word, or to have this, gift of forgiveness. And forgiveness is truly a gift, and that's this last Sunday when we used the brief order of confession and forgiveness. After that, it's as a called and ordained minister of the Church of God, and by His authority, I declare unto you the forgiveness of sin. This is the pastor's job. This is the priest's job, and it is one of the things that people look for. And there have been many times that I've been asked to come to visit someone in their home, in a hospital room, in a nursing home, especially when they're getting closer to death, to have Holy Communion as a family to gather together. This ritual that we follow, this command that Jesus gave us, take and eat, this is my body, take and drink, this is my blood, given and shed for you, for the forgiveness of sins. And so the specifications, the duties of the priests were spelled out very carefully and very thoroughly. And in chapter 7, it talks about, in verse 19 it says, flesh that touches any unclean thing shall not be eaten. As for other flesh, As for other flesh, all who are clean may eat such flesh. But and so we haven't really gotten into the what's clean and unclean yet. We will find out a lot of that in chapter 11 of Leviticus, but yet there are references already to the clean and unclean. And so, we may be wondering, well, what's clean and what's not? Well, we haven't been told that yet, but we've just been reminded that there are certain things that we should do and shouldn't do, and know that we're going to be given more instruction later on. And so the chapter 7 ends with the ritual of, it's a summary of what's been covered. This is the ritual of the burnt offering, the grain offering, the sin offering, the guilt offering, the offering of ordination, the sacrifice of well-being. So all of these things, these different types of offerings have been directed by God. God has instructed Moses on how to instruct the priests to do them, and then Moses has had these words written down. And for all, so for so much of history, a lot of history was always just oral, and because they didn't have access to paper and pens and pencils and a computer that could just hit a button and print something out. And just the other day I went into a place and the person that was helping me said, "Oh, these things take forever to get something done." Yeah, and I thought, no, they really don't, but we've got things so much different. But anyway, these first 7 chapters of Leviticus have been dealing with how a person becomes right with God again when they have sinned, and for us it is. I feel so fortunate, as I've said before, that I can come to God through Jesus Christ, knowing that when I confess and I ask, God forgives me, as He does you.